All right, welcome everybody. My name is Michael Kanters. I'm a professor in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management here at NC State University. I've been teaching this concept of risk management for a very long time, both in the context of parks and recreation, but also within the context of sport and sport management. So let's talk about the term risk management for a second before we get into what it is and how it works. Risk management generally is really a fairly simple concept. You identify risks, you decide how bad they are, and then if it's bad enough, you do something about it. The first step in the risk management process is doing what's called a risk audit or a risk assessment. You have to go through every aspect of your operation, both on the facility side and on the event side. You look at your human resource operations, and you go through all of those and you identify anything that would constitute a risk, would create liability exposure for you, or might create a situation where someone might get injured. Once you've identified it, then you have to go through and evaluate each of those risks. And the way we evaluate risks is the same way insurance companies do when they're trying to decide whether to give you car insurance or insure your home, is they look at severity and frequency. So we want to look at how often this type of risk is occurring, and then how severe it is when it does occur. So there's a reason why insurance companies charge more for men to drive, particularly when they're younger, than they do women, because an analysis of the severity and frequency of the accidents that occur indicate that a male driver, particularly when they're young, is riskier, so consequently you're going to pay more for insurance. So once you've identified how bad each individual risk is, then you have to decide what you're going to do with it. And you essentially have three things that you can do. You can either eliminate it, you can transfer it, buy enough insurance so that the risk passes from you over to the insurance company, or you can retain and reduce it. So if you're going to retain it, then you want to try to control the risk as much as possible. And this is really where the meat or the heart of the risk management process takes effect. Within the venue management business, there's a number of areas that warrant having a risk management process, a risk management plan in place. But if you can help sort of identify those areas by asking a series of questions. So the first one is, are your facilities safe? Are your events managed properly to ensure the safety of those people coming to the events? Are your staff appropriately trained and qualified? Are your hiring practices fair and equitable? Are you complying with all federal, state, and local laws? And finally, are you adhering to industry standards of practice? Every industry has specific standards that they think are common, and it's important that you, one, know that what those industry standards are, and two, that you're implementing them in a reasonable way in your facilities and with your events. So sound risk management practices, when they're implemented, are designed to, one, prevent injuries from occurring, which will reduce the number of potential lawsuits. If people aren't getting hurt in your facilities or at your events, they're less likely to file a lawsuit against you. Second part of sound risk management practices is that they provide the necessary protection and defense when injuries occur, because the likelihood is that they are going to occur, and then when people follow up and sue. So if you haven't implemented proper and sound risk management practices, the attorneys that are going to be representing you in those lawsuits are going to use those practices, the evidence of those practices, as a defense to protect you in the event that you have lawsuits filed against you. And finally, if you have sound risk management practices in place, you're going to be able to adapt services and programs to changes in the law, and laws change, and changes in industry standards of practice. One of the things that we've witnessed across the country and around the world is an increase in the number of incidents that are occurring when large numbers of people gather together. Subsequently, we've seen the industry change how they are managing crowds, how they're providing safety and security. So it's important then that you recognize that this is an industry change and that you adhere to those practices so that if something does occur, you can document, you can show that you have been conforming to what the industry is suggesting is common practice. So what are some of the guiding principles of risk management? Well, it really, if you need to take a step back and not look just specifically at risk management practices, but management practices as a whole. It needs to be a component of every aspect of the management process, from hiring people to communicating with the public to the maintenance and operations of your facilities. So if it's incorporated into all aspects of your management, then you're going to reduce your risk exposure in all aspects of the organization. The second guiding principle is the emphasis on actions or practices should be first on to protect you and the organization and your employees, and then second on creating a safe environment for your patrons. This may seem opposite, but the reality is if we focus on practices to protect the organization and the staff, ultimately you will be creating a safe environment for your patrons. One of the main principles of risk management is that you can't guarantee the safety of your patrons and customers. You can't predict everything that's going to happen at your events and in your facilities. And you can't, most importantly, you can't predict what people are going to do. Most of the events that we're dealing with in this industry involve alcohol, and that makes it even harder to predict what's going to happen. So you start off with that premise that you can't be perfect, but you do need to try to take reasonable precautions and then document these. This is critically important in the risk management process. Do what's reasonable, document what you've done, and provide a reasonably safe environment. Do your best. Look at what you're doing, look at how it's being done, and make decisions that are reasonable. Try to focus on creating a safe environment, but recognize that you can't control for everything, so what protections do you need to have in place in the event that something does and likely will happen?